Welcome everyone to our talk today at the IoT Day. It's always and we will today have a session called Building the Internet of Trust. It is all about identity, it's about allowing control, and it's about building trust. And we will look at the topic from different perspectives. That's why I'm here today, joined by fellow colleagues, by people that are interested in trust and that are active in building that trust. People that no longer want to wait for others to do so, but who themselves become active and want to build that trust. And I will introduce all of them shortly, and then we'll dive right into the conversation. So our vision is to make this a little bit of a, if you will, a mental walk. So we'll take you on that walk, virtually, of course, and well, hope we have a good conversation. If there's any questions or anything that comes to you.
Kai is freezing sometimes, huh? Yes. Wow, that's the problem with internet connections in Germany in 2021. It's more like this. Wait a second, it's more like this. So Kai, you're reconnected with your modem? No, he's still freezing. So maybe you will have a look at your internet connection. Meanwhile, we'll try to, I will just take over a little bit of the moderation, but it was perfect. So Kai, we just hear you really broken. That's the live feeling. So are you there?
It is, yeah. Yeah, I am there. I'm very much here, but probably the internet doesn't allow as I would wish for. But I hope you can hear me now.
Yes, perfect.
Yes,
excellent. Good. Then let's not waste any more time. Let me introduce whom we have here on the call. So we have Lorna Goulden calling in from the Netherlands, and she's the digital transformation lead and also initiator of the Eindhoven IoT Meetup and very active in the ThingsCon community. So hi, Lorna.
Good morning, Kai.
Then we have Jutta Meier, who is calling in from Germany, and she's the founder and CEO of the initiative Identity Valley. Hi, Jutta.
Hi there. Good morning.
Then Mirko is there with a fancy setup and also, of course, the DJ for this session. Mirko is also the CEO and founder of asvin.io. Hi, Mirko.
Hi.
And then Jeff is located in, is this the cherry tree blossom in Belgium?
Yes, and, it is.
Excellent. He's an associate and senior enterprise architect at Deloitte. Hi, Jeff.
Hi, Kai. Thank you for having me.
Well, and my name is Kai. I'm calling in from Munich, Germany. So you see, we do have a European setup, if you will, and we're trying to bring in also the different perspectives that we have, maybe also from our background. Now let's dive right into it. We said we want to talk about trust. We want to talk about identity. And about how to build that trust and maybe even build an internet of trust. That brings me to the first question. Why is trust even so important? Why do we talk about trust? Lorna, what's your perspective? Why is trust and technology even an important topic?
Well, yeah, I think the question maybe you can split into two halves. So there's the trust, but there's also the trust in technology. And I think one of the things that we're seeing now is the risk of not understanding the fundamental need for trust in society or trust between people who are interacting or transacting. And if you break that trust, you actually break the ability to have a more liquid and fluid and successful transactions and communications between people. And then when we talk about trust and technology, I think one of the concerns that we're all seeing is that if technology is actually breaking down that trust, at the same time wanting to be the means by way that we communicate and transact, then we're having actually a sort of a mismatch and an issue can arise.
Mm-hmm. And how do you see how do you see that status? So how is trust? What's the status of trust? I mean, you sketched what happens if it isn't there. Do we currently have enough trust in technology?
I mean, it varies, and I think it's also about again, it's coming back to why do we need trust, and what is that trust? What is the function of that trust, and why is it so important? And I think one of the inspirations I like is actually, if you've read the book *Sapiens* by Yuval Noah Harari, and he actually outlines that one of the functions of trust has come from a long sort of human history of evolution, and it's actually enabled us to be able to grow into larger communities that is more sustainable. And so there's a connection between trust and society and sustainability. If you understand those fundamentals, then you can understand actually how important it is in order to be able to ensure that that trust is being carefully managed. And so then when we say with technology, is trusting technology working? Is it good? I would say it's actually in decline, or it's in danger, because technology, there's two aspects, and I think I use the words exploitation and negligence. So there's two sort of sides of the same coin which are actually damaging trust. One of them maybe is not intentional, negligence, whereby things are happening, whereby people experience damage through technology not being securely set up. Exploitation, in the other side, is where it's actually intentional, where people are being exploited. Surveillance capitalism is the term that sort of arose around 2019. But both of those aspects are really again and again drawing our attention to the fact that technology is not always being set up in a trustworthy way, and that we should actually be more wary about how we use and interact with it. I don't know if that answers your question.
Absolutely, and I think it was also interesting how you mentioned that trust in technology does have also reverberations outside of the technology sphere, right? So how this is much wider than just trust in technology, if you will. Which brings me also to the question, so okay, now we know that there might be a deficit or a decline in trust. The question is, how do you build that trust then, and how can you make that happen? And Jutta, that's the question for you. So we heard it, it depends on technology. Does it only depend on the technology? Are there more factors that we need to build that trust? What's your insight there?
Yeah, I absolutely think so, because if I think about trust, I start with myself and with the people I trust, so humans. So I think about the real world, and if you think about our understanding of trust in the real world, it's sometimes it's just there. You meet people like Kai when we met. There is kind of a basis of trust. We cannot describe it, just there, because we feel we have the same maybe purpose in life, and this is something that connects us immediately. And bringing that into technology, I think, well, that's our task. And I think, we really should keep in mind that in every step that it's about how we can help humans to make their life better with technology. And if we will manage to bring trust into technical solutions, that would be amazing, and that's absolutely necessary. And so we have to think about every individual that we meet along that road to do that, and to explain that in simple words and not just in technology wording. So my experiences by being a digital consultant for more than 10 years, you have to talk to people like you talk to children, and it's the same if you talk to executives or children. So you have to keep it simple, and building trust in technology, from my point of view, needs much of education and thinking about the core of our identity and of our values. And so building values into having values as a basis on technological projects and services, from my point of view, is key.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. So it's about, it's about building that trust through education, through explaining in languages that can be understood. You also mentioned it's about values.
Yeah.
What are tools, approaches, strategies that help kind of foster the simple language, foster the values? Is there something that you have in your kind of toolbox that you use to build that trust?
Well, it's something that I'm working on for quite a time. So trying to explain digital technologies to executives is a hard thing. They have to use it and they have to feel it and they have to see what's in for them. And so it's with every technology. And I think, yeah, it's a lot about communication and having a joint understanding of what is our goal in technology, or what are our goals in technology. And yeah, we are working on something like that to keep it very simple, to have a definition of some goals we may all be able to understand and to commit to. And I think this might be helpful, and this is why we are currently working on the idea of having a bigger picture for digital transformation, where trust is the most important layer and not technical solutions. So it's about what is in there then in the final development.
So it's really thinking about why having digital transformation in the first place, and not for the sake of digital transformation.
Yeah.
But what is it? What is the goal? Why do we want to have it?
Yeah.
With what kind of a purpose, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Now, if I may go back to technology and also to the topic of identity, because this is key part of our session today. Jeff, looking at you, I would be interested in, what does this mean with respect to technology? How does technology have to be developed? What are concepts that enable trust? If you think about technology, what is it that comes to your mind?
Yeah, well, when I hear Jutta and Lorna speaking, I fully agree with that, but there should be some way that this idea of trust, this concept of trust, is actually translated into technology. Otherwise, it will just not happen by itself. People will use what they know, what they have been using for quite a while. And this does not intrinsically have trust built in this technology. So actually what I think is that we should build, or architect, as architect, the trust into the technology from the ground up, from the beginning. It is like, you heard about designing privacy, for instance, in an application, but I think this is fake. We should really make this very clear, use case by use case. But trust is even more vaguer, I would say, for the technologist. So I think these principles that Jutta mentioned are very important to start with, and then see how can we build them into the technology layers. And I'm not talking just about security, because security, what does that mean again? But also about being able as user, as human, as a normal user, not really a technology expert, being able to observe what's going on inside those boxes. And so can we inspect what's going on, and can we know that what is going on is actually going on? So that also means a lot of work for all the stakeholders to turn around their usual processes into a different way of thinking, and how can we then architect this into this new system way of thinking, right?
So you have been talking about a principles-based architecture, which I think is very intriguing. So how do you build principles or values into the architecting process? And then the other idea you mentioned was that of transparency, if I understand correctly. So it's not just building it in, but also sharing transparently how it is built in, right?
Yes.
Did I get that correct?
Yes, very true. Let me start with the first part. So principles are usually laid down in paper, and you can translate them into certain rules if you want. So that might be a way that the technologist interprets it. So if you would encode that in a sort of a digital format that a program can actually read, you can do that. So you can have, let's say, the law or the rules or the principles in some kind of written form that humans can read, but also that the machine can read. And we could say that we can call this a sort of a digital contract, if you want. because it's always about engaging a human, a user with a machine, whether it be a new kind of device or an old kind, doesn't matter. It's you make this engagement and you say, okay, listen, within this set of rules, within this engagement contract, if you want, that's where we can work. And you make sure you follow the rules. And we do that with digital technology, with specific, there are technologies available today where we can do that.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Yeah, thanks a lot, Jeff. And I'm intrigued to ask more, but I will go deeper in the next round, so to say. But before, I wanted to give Mirko also the chance to share some of his insights with us. Mirko, I wanted to also make IoT a topic here, of course, because this is IoT Day. So we're talking about IoT. Now, how does this trust, the principles, the build of trust and the technology, how does that all relate to IoT? Give us an insight. Why do we need this for IoT?
Well, I think trust is the most important challenge we need to solve in the IoT world. And just let me explain why. Currently, we are coming from a world where we think there are static architectures, where you know what kind of devices is talking to whom or to other devices. So it's a well-determined world we are coming from. But in the future, the IoT world will be much more dynamic. I mean, if we want to really leverage from all the advantages of IoT, it means that we are stepping in a world where interconnections will be built on a very ad hoc level. Take an example. For example, if you're driving an autonomous vehicle in a smart city, I mean, the vehicle needs to talk to other vehicles just to identify what kind of data and actions needs to be performed by the artificial intelligence on the car. As well, this vehicle needs to communicate with the traffic management system and the traffic lights. So there's a lot of communications taking into place, which is rather ad hoc. I mean, and it's even maybe only a one-time communication where the communication partners are just meeting once upon their life, just because it's needed for managing these special situations. Now, think about if we are coming from a determined world where we know what are our communications partners and we can define how to trust them because we know them, it's a rather easy world. The future world will be much more complicated because we need really to trust. We need to define, as we are doing it from a social perspective as well, an autonomous car needs to define the level of trust. For example, what is the trust of the traffic light? Mm-hmm. What is the trust of the autonomic cars? I'm just interchanging my data on a traffic situation. And I mean, how to do that? What is the level we will determine that kind of communication? And why it is so important to have this trust? Because if I go as a car into an interaction with a traffic light, for example, from a cybersecurity perspective, the most question will be, is this really a traffic light or is this a malicious attacker? Mm-hmm. Or second, okay, it's a traffic light, but is it really a valuable, trustworthy traffic light, or is it a traffic light running Bitcoin mining procedure on it? And by that, it's just displaying red, green, and yellow on a random way. I mean, that's the question which are really essential for the future.
Interesting. Yeah, and I can really see, Mirko, that you are a cybersecurity professional, like myself, because you see it from a risk perspective, right? You see, okay, what could go wrong, right? And that's our art, if I can call cybersecurity an art, but I do. So talking about risk, that's super interesting. So we've been tackling this kind of from the trust perspective. Now we're looking at it from the risk perspective. What are the risks? Like, I mean, what are the risks involved in IoT? Please elaborate a little bit on that perspective. Okay. What do you see if you look at this with these glasses, with the risk glasses?
Okay, no, I don't want to be too much the bad guy here, but of course, I mean, let's have a look why we are doing all these interconnections and IoT stuff. I mean, the main idea of that is that we need data to perform the actions, to leverage, to have, let's say, the advantages of a data-driven economy. Mm-hmm. So if we can't trust the data, we can't drive the data-driven economy. And now data, in 99% of all cases, the data is sourced by IoT devices because there's a sensor out there or there's an actuator out there. And if the sensor is attacked or the sensor is compromised or the sensor is not updated since 10 years, I mean, what does it mean? It means like, maybe I need to distrust the data because otherwise all the following processes in the data supply chain will be compromised. And this could be, for example, affecting, some buzzwords, a digital twin. Because where you think, wow, we are building digital twins, which are simulations of our world. And by that, we can do prediction and we can train AI algorithms and stuff like that. But if the data is not trustworthy, we are feeding our digital twin. The digital twin is not trustworthy. And this could have really huge impacts. One impact is where we're discussing bias in AI, like that the decision of AI has some, let's say, pre-settings which are leading into wrong results. And this doesn't mean that it's always based upon a malicious stuff, but something is going terribly wrong maybe with the data, and that's why we need trust.
Yeah, super interesting perspective, and sorry for pushing you a little bit in the, the bad cop position.
No,
but
okay.
Well, you're used to this as a cybersecurity professional. But I think the important part is to make something out of this, right? Seeing the risk and then thinking it through and realizing that if the data isn't trustworthy, nothing that builds on it can be trustworthy, because that's what I understood from your perspective, which is, I think, so powerful. So we are here today talking about IoT, but actually talking about so much more than, if I may say, just IoT. And that takes this view at the risk and then thinking positively about, okay, so what can we do? Which brings me also to the topic that I think brings all of us together here next to trust. It's the topic of identity, digital identities. Because there's a belief that digital identities, can be a central element in building that trust and enabling IoT. But I first want to learn and understand a little bit more why that is the case. And Lorna, if I can turn again to you on the topic of digital identity, why is that the topic? How does that relate to IoT? Can you elaborate a little bit on digital identity?
I can actually. I think also to refer to what Mirko was saying, his great example of the traffic light. At some point, these objects that are interacting need to be able to identify each other, and you need to have some kind of verification. Is the traffic light a traffic light? Is it a trustworthy traffic light? And at what point and where does that actual verification, identification come? And how do you know that that is also reliable? And I think, we can then extrapolate that also to interactions between humans, between organizations, between institutions. Every step of the way within these interactions, we need to have some sense of insight and transparency. Am I actually transacting and communicating with the entity or identity that I believe I am, who they are representing themselves as? And again, another sort of underlying element of that identity, which is super interesting, is the representation. And again, when we're talking to identity, does an entity or a person or an organization have just one identity? Or do they have multiple identities where they are representing themselves for a particular context or a particular purpose? And is that an identity or representation that I can trust, that I can then transact and communicate in a trustful way?
So identity is key to authentication and to kind of building the trust. Understood?
It's a little bit more than that, because it goes to actually the credibility in a particular context. So, for example, I'm communicating with a medical professional. I need to know if that medical professional is truly the medical professional. Are they qualified? Are they verified? Have they been struck off the register? I need to have some kind of insight into that representation of that identity. I don't need to know per se whether they are a family person. I don't necessarily need to know where they live, whether they have pets. A lot of aspects about their identity that may be relevant for another context. I just need to know about that context that I'm connecting with, and needing to trust that that interaction is as it appears. And I think we're talking about the digital domain, because I am not face to face with that person, that identity, that representation, and I'm also not surrounded by other people, which is normally the way in the physical world that we say, okay, I know that person, I know that doctor, that is the person, and they're very trustworthy because I've had interactions. And how we build that up in the physical domain, we need to look at how that can also be translated into the digital domain.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, and thank you. And I think one thing that we see is that maybe at current the identity solutions that are out there do have certain flaws. I mean, the statistic that we've seen last year is that 1 in 5 people in Europe have had their identity stolen or compromised. So there seems to be something wrong if we see this kind of a statistic. Lorna, do we have the right mechanisms in place to build digital identities, or to digital identities?
Well, we do, but I think you've brought up some really good examples of where at the moment we're in a transition period where we're using identifiers, indeed, like, you know, address, social security number, telephone number. These are sort of identifiers that we have a reasonable faith that they belong to a person or an entity or an organization. But once they're but they're also, you know, elements of data that get hacked, that get taken, and then can get reused for purposes that we don't want them to be used for. And so we're still in a position where we need to transform to what are the identifiers that could be maybe better suited to a particular purpose, rather than, you know, we're using our driving license to identify ourselves perhaps for a medical procedure. Mm-hmm. And it has information on it which is not relevant. Or we're using it to, and we have the example in the supermarket where somebody wants to buy alcohol, they need to prove they're over 18. At the same time, they have to give their name, they have to give their address, maybe their social security number. Why? And so we need to sort of evolve to the sort of context of identifiers, verified identifiers relating to the specific context, and a little bit in the terms of GDPR, you know, minimization, data minimization, and identity minimization, perhaps.
That's a very interesting thought. And then purpose bound also, right? So for that specific purpose, what is really needed? What's the information that is needed?
Yes. Yeah. And I think also adding to that one, which is my favorite one, and I think an increasing frustration, is time bound. So for every interaction you do, for example, with e-commerce, I mean, I know many people, myself included, have multiple email addresses, because mm-hmm. your main email address, if you use that, it gets hacked. You just, you know, it ends up being worthless. But still, you know, you end up getting a message for something you bought maybe 5 years previously. They still had your data stored, it got hacked, and now they're, you know, you're sort of subject to potential identity fraud, or, you know, the email address or the telephone number even is something that you have to actually dump. And you say, well, you know, I would have preferred to have known that that data had actually been deleted right after the transaction, giving it a time-bounded nature as well as a purpose-bound nature.
Yeah. Just like, I mean, we've seen this example of the Facebook hack that was happening in 2019 with 500 million, like 500 million data sets. That was 2019, and my thought was like, okay, I'm no longer on Facebook for reasons of trust and the likes. So I don't have an account there anymore. But I have to now think about, maybe my data was still in there because it was such a long time ago, right? So you know, because they keep it on file anyways, even if you leave the network, which is not a nice thought.
Which is illegal, but yes.
Yeah, but you never know, you know. What I found interesting, maybe as an anecdote, then to learn that Mark Zuckerberg doesn't use WhatsApp but Signal, because he probably doesn't even trust his own technology. But there we are, trust and technology. And maybe, Jeff, I would like to turn to you, because we've heard about identity and Lorna's description of, okay, we need to think about identity differently in terms of what are the identifiers, how can we minimize the identifier shade, and also give it a time-bound perspective. How can that be done? What's the technology that could enable this?
Yeah, I would say to move away from this traditional usage of telephone numbers, emails, addresses, which can be used for any malicious things, but also good things, to move completely away from that by using other kinds of digital identifiers which are based on cryptography. And what is the beauty of that? The beauty is that you can, you need a key. It's like a key to your door to actually use that identifier. And you can do so many things so that, like we spoken about before, about data, and that is the economic value that is exchanged. Well, if you can just encrypt that data with your own key and you allow others to view it or not, you turn around the role, which now is like conventionally saying, okay, just spill out the data, and then we'll see if we'll ask your permission later. So you turn around the whole discussion here. So in this way, it cannot be compromised because you are involved. So it is much harder to make a bridge between the real world, like the example of Mirko with traffic lights, and even with humans nowadays, particularly when there's a digital interface, even cameras or video can be, faked. So the real challenge is, how do we bridge the digital and the physical world? And can we trust the bridge as well, the tool or whatever that bridge is? So it gets into a rabbit hole. But what I would say is, start with using cryptography, using these keys, these cryptographic keys, to create identities as much as you want. And these identities can be single purpose. Like if you just cross that traffic light once, you can use it once. So not necessarily it knows who you are, but it knows that some car has passed. That could be enough for the purpose of that traffic light or whatever. Not necessarily Jeff has passed or whatever. And so we should, again, redesign every experience that we have with these devices and build in these new tools, or this is not new, but I mean, this has gone now into more mainstream, I would say, this identity-based or digital identity-based way of working, turning around the whole process, getting everything in the hands of the user, which is also the spirit of the law at the GDPR, at least here in Europe. And then I would say, coming back to my contract matter, so even for that exchange of data between the traffic light, which says, well, actually, I'm doing more than showing lights, but I'm actually capturing that you have passed. So even that thing needs the permission from us to do that. And that needs to go fast. So again, we have no time to go into negotiation on a classical way. No, this must be going fast, digital, but still in a safe and trustworthy way. So that's the key. Okay.
And you mentioned now contract several times. And if I think about digital and contract, of course, I think about distributed ledger or blockchain. So is that something that is involved there? Does it build on the concept or is this two different?
Well, the thing is, this is a dual thing. This is a difficult matter. Why? Because of the GDPR law says that you cannot do anything unless you can erase it when it's concerned with personal data. On the other hand, the industry should have this responsibility, this traceability thing. So I would like to know really from a blockchain, what is this device? And is this device that I'm seeing actually that device? Therefore, I would say, yes, blockchain is great. But for us, as we having personal data, actually can't be used because the right of GDPR to be forgotten, the right to be forgotten, it's just not possible because on a blockchain, you cannot erase the data. So that is really hard to engineer, that we still have both, dualities here, and you have to work around it. So I think that's in the art of how can we prove maybe a super identity, which might be on a blockchain, but not for every interaction, putting everything on a blockchain, which is also not economically and financially feasible, because it's quite expensive to put something on a blockchain. Right.
Yeah, so, and also that, I mean, raises the question of energy efficiency. We think about blockchain. So that's the question that is being asked more often than not these days.
Right.
But interesting. You mentioned something very interesting: the duality of data protection and the use of data. So kind of maybe sometimes in the public conversation, antagonists, opposing poles, kind of. At least I see that in the German media often. So there's a complaint about we cannot use the data because of too much data protection. Jutta, I wanted to look at you for that question. Are these antagonists, or how would you see that? So the data protection kind of versus the use of data.
Yeah, well, from my point of view, the data protection law is a great thing that is a first step for Europe to kind of showcase that we have a different attitude. And I think that's super important, because if you think about what are the other ways in our world, if you look into China, for example, do we want to have a social credit system? There is kind of trust from their point of view, because they have a very different definition of trust. And so people who live there, and also people who are having all the data there, so the government say, well, we can take care of everything. But is that kind of a way we want to have here in Europe? Or is maybe the American way something we would like to be like? So using technology all the time, innovating like hell, and not thinking about digital transformation, but just making it and defining it, and using data because it's there, and taking everything and starting platform economies, which seemed to be a very good construct, but now it turns out, so there are just a few people really having some advantages out of these platform economy models. So I think there has to be a European answer that it's much more than just having a data protection law. So from my point of view, it's about a mindset and an attitude, because having started the Identity Valley is exactly because of all the things Lorna just said. Yeah, we have to take care of our identity, take care of our humanity, and build that into technological solutions. And this is why we founded the Identity Valley as an answer and evolution to Silicon Valley, because it's not about just some material that makes possible that we have these small technologies into these supercomputers in these small formats. It's about us, it's about humanity. And I think there is a big chance for Europe to build in trust into technology. And exactly what Mirko stated with the example of autonomous driving, being a consultant in the automotive industry for a long time, I know all these discussions. And I think if you have the chance to choose a car, an autonomous car in 5 years, to put your children into that car to bring them to the kindergarten, which car would you use? Would you choose the Chinese car, the European car, or the US car maker? If you know there is one part in there, there's trust built inside. And I think that's something we should all understand. And I think we need a big picture to focus on that. So that's my point of view on that.
Thank you. So kind of, a European picture on building that trust, or kind of maybe also an alternative vision, if you will. Yeah. Now, you said you founded Identity Valley. Why did you found that organization then? Does it need new organizations, or isn't that something that the car makers anyways have to do?
Very good question. So I think I have quite a good ecosystem. So I know some people, but there are so many interests in all these industries, politics, and everywhere, science. And yeah, Identity Valley is a nonprofit organization, and so I just recognized there needs to be like a space where people can come together and discuss all these topics, and not being driven by their company's goals and by political goals, but thinking about all these topics. Like you look on a blanket paper. So just start by thinking about what is our goal, and not by thinking about we have technology, what shall we do with that? But think about what do we want to do for us, for our humanity? And oh, we have some digital tools here. Let's use them. But how can we use them? And well, I think this has to be discussed, and you need to bring people together and also bring them into action. And I think so. It's the first time I ever founded a nonprofit organization, of course. So this is something you do because you believe in something, and I believe in the power of people to change things. But you have to have kind of a place where they can come together, and this is what we want to do.
Excellent. So yeah, like an institution that can drive this and can think about this.
Hopefully, yeah.
Excellent.
Can I maybe add?
Oh, yeah. No, Lorna, just start.
No, I was going to say a great connection actually with what you were saying there, Jutta, and what you were saying, Mirko, also about the risk aspect. And one of the biggest risks indeed is a lot of solutions being developed without this diverse perspective. And it connects also, again, I think, to what you were saying, Jeff. There's a lot of guidelines already out there that we can sort of springboard from. So if you see guidelines for example, responsible AI, where you've got words that I can't even pronounce, but beneficence, you've got autonomy, you've got explainability, but also you've got all of the GDPR guidelines. You've got from many different organizations. IEEE also has a list of a manifesto of recommendations for good technology development and also the regulatory guidelines. And I think the risk that we're seeing and where technology is perhaps damaging and eroding trust is that these discussions are not happening up front about what is the driving force behind this development. And of course, from the business perspective, it's about, being able to beat the competition, be a sustainable business organization and make a lot of money. But you also have to have the other perspectives, the legal perspectives, the ethical perspective. Now, ethics is also a really key one that guides us outside of the regulatory boundaries, because it gives us also those cultural guidelines where we need to make decisions that are not set in the regulatory framework. And that's why I think it's great also, because the ethics from the Chinese perspective, from the European perspective, this being generalistic, and American perspective will be different. Mm-hmm. And it's not saying one is right or one is wrong. It's like, where is your cultural foundation? And the risk factor is not so much in have we developed this correctly, but have we actually looked at all of the key facets before we've even decided what we're developing. So I think maybe, hand over to Mirko, what you were probably going to add something along similar lines.
It's perfect, Lorna, because I just wanted to add, we are coming from a world, from an economic perspective, where people and consultants and industry decision makers were telling data is the new oil. You remember, there's a value in data. And by that, we are sourcing data wherever we can, and we are storing data. Okay. And the moment we are talking now, Facebook had leaked 500 million data sets. LinkedIn has also leaked about 500 million data sets this week. I mean, so to me, data is not a new oil. Data is a burden. Data is a burden because if we see the increasing data leaks and the stuff which is going wrong, even from a compliance perspective for companies, they need to take care more on how to save data. There will be as well risks involved, like with GDPR, where you can say, well, data is a burden. It's not, if data is oil, I would tell them data is liquid. What we see is that it's just running away wherever, and we need to take, I mean, you can't stop it. It's just draining out of your systems, because that's the way how IT and cybersecurity works. Data is draining. So no, data is a burden. And if you take data as a burden, you take data seriously, how to care about data and how to protect data. And of course, the way how we treat and take care on data is binded to the identity, because that's all about, I mean, like if we look about all this big data, shit, which is going on, a lot of that is going on because of advertising industry, like identifying someone, identifying a problem, identify a user, identify a problem, optimize it. I mean, that's the way how it works. So it starts always with identifying something and then connecting the data and doing all this metadata shit, which is going on. I'm really angry about that. So yes, it starts with the identity. We need systems where we can tie the data to identity from a perspective where the user can control the identity, and by a proactive user decision, I can say, well, I switch off this identity, and by that all the data which is associated to all this metadata, Palantir, evil analytics, which is going on, or Google, or name it. I mean, it's all there. Zoom or whatever, it's gone. That's the way how we need to enable the future internet. And then I'm satisfied. So, and I'm so glad that I have here people who are trying to bring more empowerment of the user back to a system which is completely failing.
Yeah, it's nice, very nice, Mirko, and everyone, to see your engagement there on the topic, and also how this, how you personally feel this. I mean, you're also a practitioner, Mirko. So let me ask you the question. In theory, this all makes sense to me. But when will we see this in practice? When can we build that internet of trust? When will it be there?
I'm rather hopeful on that, because I see a lot of initiatives out there who are creating now, bringing back layers of trust. I mean, what we are doing with the Twins Foundation, for example, is one layer. They are all building blocks. If I see the Solid project of Tim Berners-Lee with the data pods, it's one building project. There are a lot of building projects out there with decentralized technologies, bringing decentralized technologies into place. Take as well the blockchain space, which is as well rather controversial. I'm not a fanboy of everything which is going on, but there's a lot of things which are talking about decentralizations, and they're building the layers for that. And of course, we can't expect industry to follow everything because it's not in their interest. But if we have the tools out there, someone will build something up on that. And if this is a seed, then we just need to take care how we can grow the small little seed to a plant, and then grow it more to a strong tree. I think that's the way how it works.
Nice. So in a way, even if I may say so, a grassroots movement, right? So different kind of building blocks popping up everywhere, that of course need to be combined in a way, right? And then need to build on each other. I think that's, of course, in technology, we always think about interoperability, right? In a way, is what we need to have, and then they can build on each other, and maybe make a difference, right?
Yeah, and at the end, maybe last, then Lorna, and at the end, it's maybe as well an economic decision, because if we see some certain business model will not work anymore because there is no trust in it, because the data is leaking. To be honest, Facebook has now they have a serious trust problem, and the people are running away. That's the way. That's the reason why they are buying other services and startups. Because if companies see that their current business model are getting into a trust problem and they can't run the business in a way they would like to do, then they will shift their perspective towards what's out there on technologies which are bringing back this level of trust to run their business. I think that's the way how it works.
Thank you. Lorna, you wanted to build on that or say something to it.
Yeah, I think indeed this sort of grassroots. I mean, we're all sort of a little bit involved with the communities who are building a lot of the open source tools to enable a slightly more trusting internet. But then there's a step that needs to come that I think is really key, which is connecting that to policy and the legal requirements. And I think Facebook is a brilliant example. I mean, I went through the experiment of trying to leave all of the large social media platforms or organizations, and to a certain measure of success. But then I saw, for example, that when we experimented with a tracker on the phone, my children were actually being most tracked by Facebook. Despite nobody in the family having an account, they were still being followed and tracked. And there's nothing at the moment that would actually in a regulation that would protect them. But if we have this transparency, we can then start to look at regulatory aspect and say, are they actually working towards supporting us social culturally, or actually hindering? And another aspect on the identity, which is really I think a super interesting sort of discovery, is that this was actually brought to my attention by an artist a few years ago, who looked into, we actually legally in Europe are allowed to have multiple legal identities that we can actually use to conduct legal transactions. And it is perfectly allowed and enabled, so long as we're not committing fraud. Whereas in America, within this decade, that's actually been now prevented, which means you only have one legal identity that's government owned. And if you look at the impact of that, it means that you're actually renting your identity from a centralized organization, which can then be connected between all services. And from a European perspective, I'm like seriously alarmed by that, and think that with our technology, we need to make sure that we are protecting the ability for people to interact in different sort of identities, pseudonyms, because certain situations require that, because it prevents connections to be made. And so we have to be also very wary and aware with what we're developing the technology. We don't inadvertently take us down a path of sort of no return that causes more harm than good. And I think one of the things we need to do is to work very closely with legal experts to dig deeper into how regulations have sort of developed over the last few decades, and where we might be going down paths that actually could have more of a negative impact than we realize upfront. So I think that's an important facet that we're calling on the legal experts to also guide us in our process.
Yeah, and I think it's a nice example that shows how there's kind of the wheels have to grip into each other, so to say, to get this moving, right? So it's technology, it's economic motivations that need to be there, but it's also legal, political motivations that kind of need to run in a similar direction, right?
And maybe just one final point on the top level of that is, it's not about blocking, it's not about stopping, it's not about the privacy brigade, if I may say, saying stop doing everything. It's actually about finding ways of enabling more, enabling much more valued interaction, so that the data that you get is actually more valuable. If I trust the person I'm sharing my data with, I'm more likely to give even more personal information, more data, because I trust that they will treat that correctly. I think one last example I'd like to give is with the Dutch institution that was responsible for the corona tests. I trusted them explicitly, unfortunately, so gave my personal email address, phone number, etc. And then what we discovered is that despite multiple warnings, they actually had an incredibly insecure system. All the information was downloaded, is now being traded. But I actually trusted them as being a governmental medical organization, that they would really treat my data correctly. If we can actually, with our technology, really validate that trust relationship, then I believe that the data that gets shared is going to actually increase in value. So rather than being oil, it's going to become gold.
And this, nice. Maybe this, let me add, it's a very good point. And I think this is not about blocking others, because I mean, restrictions, you can always go with restrictions, but we see that there are technology companies out there who don't care about restrictions, because if you want to first mover, blah, 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 and so on, I mean, you go over any restriction. I think what we need to establish are the alternatives. So to say, like, if if we think there's something going wrong in how we deal with IDs and data ownership, okay, that's the way how the internet is maybe built. It's maybe a core problem of the internet architectures. But if we enable alternative technologies, if we say, well, there are the technologies are out there, you can simply use them, then we enable other companies or other users to use that technology. And if there are developers out there with an ethical thinking, or companies out there who turn their business model towards an ethical business model, I mean, they have then all the abilities to do that. They have no obstacles to step in. That's the way how we need to do that. Support the good ones, blame the bad ones. I mean, that's the way how we can create a better internet.
If I can add to that, you mentioned, Jutta, the German brands and the European principles that we have. Actually, here is an opportunity for the German brands to say the next level of quality that Miele has is not just in the washing machine itself, but also how it treats the data. Same for BMW. Same for any other Belgian company or Dutch company or whatnot. And also, I think there is help needed from people like you, Jutta, to tell them, how do we translate a trustworthy AI, which is what you were referring to, Lorna, into very practical steps for that specific company, for that specific product, because they're not really involved enough to make that mapping themselves. So there is really help, I think, by independent parties to support them, to guide them towards this journey and really designing the UX and the technology interactions step by step, saying, what are you doing here? Is it against the trustworthy AI stuff? Because I think we should eliminate the word AI, just say trustworthy technology, pure sang, and use the same principles. It is will be a lot about educating the companies and the governments, I think, because the building blocks by themselves will not rise up to their level because they're not busy with that. CEOs are not knowing what they mean, these building blocks. They have no knowledge about it. So that's the bridging that we make as I do with enterprise architecture. I say, what are your enterprise goals? Okay, but are they fitting within the trustworthiness? You're saying you're following, let's say, the principles of what is called
it's about the digital responsibility. So
the Digital Responsibility Act. That's it, like we have with products and with sustainable goods. We need something like that with clear guidelines, with a clear C-level language, which you said was childlike, but it means you can communicate to everybody. Yeah, can you tell something about that and how we can use that as technologists as a guideline to do our work?
Yeah. Thanks, Jeff. Now we need to look at the time because we only have 1 minute left. So, okay, I'd like to wrap up. I think we could go on for a bit longer, easily, because I see there's a shared view. There's also a shared engagement, if you will, on changing the digital landscape for the better. So Mirko just made that statement also, look, we need to provide positive alternatives. And I think we're jointly working on that. For it is a matter of trust. So we, I think, take from this session that trust is an economic imperative. It's a societal imperative. And that now needs to be translated into technology. It needs to be translated into regulatory, and it needs to be translated also into a discussion and into a set of principles that then can provide a certain form of orientation. And that could be the basis for an internet of trust. So an IoT that generates data that is trustworthy, that's useful, that is accurate, and then can allow a lot of digital services and digital applications on top of that. And I think that's the vision that this group here shares, and that's the vision we want to give also to the IoT Day and all the other sessions. So thank you very much, everyone, for the viewers to tie into this. And of course, Lorna, Jutta, Jeff, and Mirko for doing this joint session here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you.
Yeah.